Good afternoon. How you guys doing today? Hope you're doing well. Um, Coming at you with a quick video here about some fishing and tidal spots. Um, I'd first like to point out I live on the East Coast, up in Connecticut. We do a lot of striper fishing up here, fish for striped bass. And a lot of the times we'll be fishing with the tide. Because if you're not fishing with the tide, your chances of catching fish are not nearly as high. Um, but yeah, I like to fish in this place called Guilford. Um, it's got a lot of inlets and rivers, tons of spots to fish. I specifically fish under bridges and in fast flowing areas with a lot of water. It can be very deep, very shallow, could be any type of spot. I would like to mention if you live on the West Coast, the fishing probably won't be the same. Um, I don't even know how to fish out there. I've never fished out of there, so can't really say much about it. But nevertheless, we got this spot over here, which I'm going to talk about first because it's a very easy explanation of a spot. So right here, we got this spillway coming out of this bridge. You could see a heavy pour of water on this side, and currently this is in this picture anyway, it's a incoming tide because this is the ocean side and that is the river side. So that's an incoming tide. So the first thing I wanted to point out, this specific spot is right on the open water just about. So you have the open water and then the bridge is right here. So I bring this up because when you're fishing, if you go to look at the tide chart, you want to go out when it's high tide. If you go out on high tide, you can go to this spot. Let's say it's 7 a.m., for example. If your high tide's at 7 a.m., you can go to the spot at 7 a.m. and it will be high tide. And I bring this up because if you, for example, went to a river like this one, this really long, windy river, if the high tide is at 7:30, for example, and you come here at 7:30, it's not going to be high tide. It's going to be close to high tide probably, but it's going to be within 2 hours of whichever way the tide's going, if it's about to be coming in or going out, whatever. So it really just depends on the spot you're fishing. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is you can't just look at the tide chart if you're going bridge fishing and be like, okay, it's high tide right now, let's go. Because it's not always the case. I will say, though, this can play in your favor because as you go down a coast, right, the tide is slowly going from north to south. So basically, if you start up, in Clinton or whatever, for example, your high tide here could be 5 a.m. and your high tide here could be 6:30. So basically, you get to work your way down slowly, fishing every bridge, on your way down. And that makes it so you could fish for a lot longer, fish like the perfect tides a lot longer, because you're constantly hitting it right at the perfect time, depending on how far up the river is the specific bridge, whatever. So you could fish that way, and you'll get a lot more fish, and you can hit a lot more spots if you keep moving around. I did want to mention I fish with these storm shads because they are very quick and easy to just throw on your spinning rod, and you can get right out, get right back home. You don't smell like bait or nothing, especially if you don't catch anything. You go home nice and clean. So yeah, specifically, I like these two right here. So this darker one and this all white one. You can get these at Walmart for like three to $4. They're very cheap. It's like a 3-pack. I usually get the 3 to 4 inch ones. really depends on the time of year. So if you're like in the prime time, which would be either the very beginning or maybe the middle to end, you'll probably want to use the bigger ones. Um, but the smaller ones will always work. They swim very well, and the stripers love them. So that's very, good information to know. Um, Actually, we'll get to this tide chart after. But yeah, so when you're working your tide, you're going to want to also make note of the moon, because the moon can play a big role in, how much water is coming in and out. So if your maximum high tide, tide variance, which is, the amount of water going in and out with each tide, if your maximum tide variance is 4.5 feet, in, let's say Madison, for example, then your minimum high tide mark could be, 2 feet, because that's just the difference the moon can make in the winter. You get a lot less water going through on like a half moon in the middle of the winter. Um, but the reason the tide is much more different, going up the river, is because it has a lot of river to work its way up and down. So it takes the water a lot longer to, get up and out of there, as opposed to like that close little spot right there in Guilford. So if you're a beginner, bridge fishing is going to be a little difficult because there's not going to be a lot of lights, a lot of the time. Well, I should say, if you're starting out, you probably should go during the day, get familiar with your spots that you're going to be fishing at, and really learn where the rocks are, where not to step. Just make sure you're being safe out there, because places at nighttime, which is when stripers are most active, places at nighttime can get, a little sketchy, especially if you're alone, if you're in a not good place, and even just environmentally, they could be, a little unsettling and hard to get through. Um, so I'd recommend going first during the day and scoping it out. Maybe first time you go at night, go with a buddy or something. Um, just learn the area, try to familiarize yourself with it so you don't go out at nighttime alone and, get stranded or something, because it's not what you want. So the next point I would like to make is following up the last thing I was talking about fishing at night. If you're just starting out, I would recommend going to a local pier of sorts and go light fishing. So when I say light fishing, I mean a couple different things that you could kind of see in this picture that I'll explain. Right here we have a dock, right? This is a public dock. It's got a big light on this bridge right here, so it lights up this whole area right here. This is a good starter spot for, nighttime. And you could kind of stand right on this dock here and cast out and, reel back those shads I was telling you about. And, eventually you'll get a hit. So a reason I'll tell you to go to one of these spots if you're, going to start right away, night fishing, is because you can see where you're casting, you can see when you're trying to dehook this fish in the middle of the night, and it's just a lot easier when you can see what you're doing. And eventually you'll get to a point where you don't need any light to fish at all. But yeah, so if you're in a place like this, you're going to be seeing exactly what you're doing, and it'll make it a lot easier for you. I want to bring up dehooking because when you're dehooking a fish, and you're a new fisherman trying to like learn the ways and whatnot, you're gonna get caught off guard probably, because sometimes the fish can get hooked pretty aggressively, and it's pretty difficult to get it out sometimes. Don't let this be discouraging, but there's going to be a couple times where you're not going to think that this fish can survive. So my motto is always save it. I'd like to point out right now that I don't eat fish. I just fish as a hobby or whatever. But when I go fishing, I never ever leave a fish, with a hook in its mouth if I can help it. I mean, sometimes it breaks off and there's nothing you could do, but when a fish gets a hook really deep in its mouth, I try as hard as I can to save the fish gently at first, and after about 2 minutes, I'll try a little harder. And at the 4 to 5 minute mark, you got to decide, okay, you're either going to get this hook out or this fish is going to die. So in the beginning, you try not to use a lot of pressure, but in that last minute or 2 minutes, you really got to push really hard on this hook to try to get it out, to try to save the fish's life. But if it's really stuck on the gills in the back, it might actually be worse if you take it out. So I would recommend always having a dehooker, because if it's a very small fish, then the mouth can be very hard to, get around getting that hook out. And eventually, if you rip on that hook too much and it's in the gills, you could actually make it worse than if you just left it in there. So there's two things you could bring with you to make this, less likely to happen. You could bring a dehooker, which is basically a tool that you could stick in the fish's mouth, and it will allow you to remove the hook a lot easier than just your bare hands, if you're catching stripers. Whereas if you're catching bluefish, you need the dehooker because they have teeth and they will bite you. But yeah, so you could grab a dehooker, and you could also grab just something to cut your lure, or make it a lot smaller. So if you have to leave that lure in that fish's mouth, it's as small as possible. You try to cut the rope as close, or not the rope, your line as close as you can to that thing. So it's just a minimal amount of stuff in this fish's mouth for the duration of the time it's in there. Start off with light fishing or fishing during the day. Familiarize yourself with the spots. Like I said, if you're going out and you're trying to fish with these tides, you're going to have to really go out more than, a few times to learn these spots, because all the spots are going to be different. Like I was saying, this one is almost right on the money of, like, if the high tide's 7:30, it's changing at 7:30, whereas this bridge will change like an hour after. This one will be an hour and a half. But it really just depends on when you're going out, and the moon. It really depends on a lot of things. So you gotta just get out there, start fishing. Maybe write it down in a notepad. That's how I learned all my spots. At first, I just kept a notepad of what times they were changing, and how far along. Like if you get there a little late, still write it down, because sometimes you'll think the tide's so confusing, because you'll go there one day and it will be the same every single time, and then that one day it'll just be like 30 to 45 minutes off. It can be weird sometimes. So yeah, just get out there and learn it. Hopefully this video has been helpful for some people. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.